Hey, if you're a returning viewer, thanks for coming back. And if you're a new viewer, welcome to my channel. This is Meta Misfit, a documentary-like series where I'm inviting you to enjoy a much deeper look into my ideas and theories when it comes to battling the meta with a strategy that's worse than Rogue to ultimately attempt to compete and win at the highest level of Yu-Gi-Oh! Over the last month or so, there has been an established precedence for how the new support wants to be pushed. Shining Sark, Primite, and other variants are all viable in this now newfound arc of current experimentation. For me, however, I've always really been gravitated towards the idea of Azamina. Why is Azamina so attractive to me for mixing it with Dark Magician as an engine? Well, for starters, Dia Bellstar is such a clean and nice bridge into the Dark Magician engine with a level 7 Dark Spellcaster monster that is insane fodder for turning into Dark Magician Destruction. This turns on the entire DM engine and it's just really strong in that regard. On my channel, you'll find different ways I was able to push and apply the Azamina engine to help Dark Magician accomplish the things it wants to do in different ways. For example, I know I really pushed the idea of Topologic Bomber Dragon as a means of replacing Dark Burning Magic, for example. Alternatively, I really pushed the idea of getting multiple Red Eyes Dark Dragoons on the board through the means of like Timaeus the United Dragon and how the Azamina card helps Timaeus become 2 Dragoons on your opponent's turn rather than just 1. All of that is still very strong, but an idea that continued to elude me is the idea of Secret Village of the Spellcasters. Why is Secret Village so good? Well, the idea that you can play under it incredibly comfortably, and the fact that it turns off 1/3 of the card pool for your opponent can be something incredibly game-changing for Dark Magician, and it could be the push needed to allow us to have a chance into future formats. My biggest gripe with Secret Village was originally the fact that I did not want to play these 3 cards in my list specifically. Yes, opening Secret Village is fantastic, however when you clog your deck with so many floodgates that prevent you from playing the game, it feels very detrimental. So essentially the idea was that I wanted to turn Secret Village into a situation where I only play 1 of this in my deck and the ability that these 2 are no longer needed because this 1 copy of Secret Village is searchable. And essentially the route to all of this was relatively lengthy for the most part. The idea started off initially with the idea of guiding Quem the Virtuous or Cartesia, and the idea was that these 2 cards would get into a card like Magician's Rod, or with a card like Magician's Rod, and this would essentially allow us to establish a line to Magician's Salvation. And because these are attuners and this is a level 3 monster, that gave the ability to play Ancient Fairy Dragon. And Ancient Fairy Dragon essentially enabled us to pop our copy of Magician's Salvation, searching Secret Village of the Spellcaster from our deck to our hand. However, there were several problems with this line of play essentially. And the problems that we came up with was there was no inherent way of getting into Blazing Cartesia or Quem outside of reliably drawing them, which put us in the same problem where if we are trying to bank on the idea of drawing Guiding Quem or Cartesia, well then we can just play 3 Village and draw it that way. This ended up leading us down the road of playing something like Foolish Burial of Goods. And the problem with Foolish Burial of Goods is that once again we are relying on drawing these cards, and there isn't any in-archetype way or line to these cards that enable all of these avenues to be played at once. So Ancient Fairy Dragon, rightfully so, essentially took a step back and it was no longer a thought in the process, thus removing the idea of Secret Village. Fast forward to Shining Sarcophagus and the Dark Magician Discord, and a few players have been experimenting with the idea of Dark Magician, the Magician's Apprentice. And the idea of this was essentially you got to a line where you were able to establish a Blue Eye Spirit, Spirit with Eyes of Blue, which got into Mausoleum. And essentially there was a line here that through Gandora and through popping monsters on the field, you would essentially get the D-mod, which would then get into your Magician's Rod, and you would make a card like this New Magistus Chorizo card. Forgive for my pronunciation. Also, forgive the idea that this is a proxy. This card, for a $2 card, is impossible to find. However, it is what it is. And essentially what a lot of Shining Sarcophagus players were doing was this really convoluted and awkward line that essentially got to the Ancient Fairy Dragon through a card like Chorizo. And essentially, this was the primary inspiration for this line. And it was the idea that Chorizo is a level 4 tuner that could go with Magician's Rod into Ancient Fairy Dragon. And essentially, the concept we came up with was a way to allow what variation of the deck can facilitate all of these combos and lines to be played coherently. And the conclusion we came up to is this. And essentially, this is the combo that's going to take Dark Magician to the next level. What we need to open for this combo is any one of Magician's Rod, Illusion of Chaos, Magician's Souls, and any copy of Wanted, Deception, and or Diabellstar. Now, if my math serves me correct, you have 8 copies of these Sinful Spoils cards, and you have 8 copies of these Magician starters. So essentially, there are 16 different combinations to essentially get to this line, and there are also alternative methods to draw into these cards as well. So if we do open up with our first 5 cards, we will open up with Diabellstar, Magician's Rod, and 3 random blanks. These blanks can be anything you want. However, what we are essentially building around is Diabellstar and Magician's Rod for this example. We start off by activating Diabellstar, sending a random card from our hand to the graveyard. We will summon our Diabellstar. Diabellstar will activate its effect, setting Deception to the graveyard. Now remember, Deception, Wanted, any variation of these cards, you just have to reconstruct the line. However, all 8 of those cards get to the exact same end board, which I am about to showcase here. We activate Deception, and because we activated a spell card, Diabellstar can banish itself to summon Dark Magician of Destruction. Dark Magician of Destruction will activate its effect, searching for Magician's Souls. Now in this example, like I mentioned in my previous video, if you open up Illusion of Chaos, Magician's Rod, or Magician's Souls, once you get to Dark Magician of Destruction, if you open any one of those cards, Illusion of Chaos and or Magician's Souls and or Dark Magician of Destruction gets you to the other pieces you need to help you facilitate those combos and to pretty much get to guarantee yourself to be in this position with Dark Magician of Destruction on field, Deception with Rod and Souls in hand. We then continue our plays by normal summoning Magician's Rod. Magician's Rod's effect will activate, searching your copy of Soul Servant. Now, Soul Servant isn't mandatory here. We can go straight into Gaze of Timaeus. However, Soul Servant generates us unbelievable amounts of advantage if we just activate it later on in the combo, which is very, very effective. What we can then do is we could utilize Magician's Soul's effect, sending Dark Magician Girl to the graveyard from the deck, special summoning Magician's Souls. Here, what we can do is we can link off Magician's Souls into your copy of Spirit with Eyes of Blue. Once Spirit with Eyes of Blue is on the field, we get access to our first field spell, which is Mausoleum of White. We can then activate Mausoleum of White, and Mausoleum of White will target either Spirit with Eyes of Blue, Dark Magician of Destruction, Magician's Rod, doesn't matter, to send your Dark Magician from your deck to the graveyard. Now we have both Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl in rotation. However, the question begs to be asked. We are locked into dragons. How are we getting rid of Spirit with Eyes of Blue? Well, in Shining Sarcophagus, you would have to go down a Gandora line of play, and other variants of Dark Magician like Primite, you'd have to get utilized to a dragon to essentially make Hieratic Seals. However, in this situation, we can utilize Deception of the Sinful Spoils to essentially send the Spirit with Eyes of Blue to the graveyard to search us Hallowed Azamina. Now in this position, we are no longer locked into dragons, which is fantastic, and we have our entire engine online. We can activate the Hallowed Azamina, revealing Rusiliago, sending Deception to the graveyard to special summon Rusiliago. Rusiliago will activate its effect, allowing us to search for Wanted Seeker of Sinful Spoils. Now here is the most important part of the combo, and it's the reason why this entire engine clicks. Rusiliago and Dark Magician of Destruction can be sent to the graveyard for a fusion summoning to summon your Magistus Chorizo, or however you pronounce that name. Apologies for the pronunciation. Now, once we have these 2 cards in rotation, our opponent can nib us. However, we can extend past this. If our opponent does have Nibiru, for example, this line is now extinguished. However, we still have all the tools and resources to keep playing, which is fantastic. Once we get into this position, Hallowed Azamina will activate its effect, targeting Rusiliago to shuffle itself back from our graveyard to our extra deck to add itself back to our hand. Here we just make a Sylvia by going Hallowed Azamina and activating Wanted Seeker of Sinful Spoils to essentially grab our copy of Diabellstar, and Hallowed will send our Wanted to summon your Sylvia. Once Sylvia is on the board, we are now nib proof. If our opponent waited this long, it's too late, and if he didn't, it's fine, we can still play anyways, which is why this line is so resilient. Once we're in this position, Chorozo and Magician's Rod can synchro summon into your copy of Ancient Fairy Dragon. Now, because we have Mausoleum White on the board, Ancient Fairy Dragon can pop the Mausoleum, sending it to the graveyard, allowing us to search for Secret Village of the Spellcasters. Now, this would be fantastic, however, the issue is Secret Village of Spellcasters dead because we don't have a Spellcaster? Well, to that I say we can absolutely get a Spellcaster on board because we can utilize Wanted and activate Wanted's effect, targeting Deception in the graveyard. With Wanted targeting Deception, we can chain our now in our hand Soul Servant. Soul Servant will stack our Gaze of Timaeus from the top to our top of the deck. Once this all resolves backwards, Deception will be sent to the bottom of the deck, Wanted is now banished, and Gaze of Timaeus is drawn to our hand. Now, additionally, what we have here is we can utilize Magician's Soul's effect to banish itself to draw another 2 cards from our deck, and these could be anything we want. And essentially we're left in a position where we have 7 cards in hand. Here we can activate our Gaze of Timaeus, and Gaze of Timaeus will shuffle back our Dark Magician of Destruction in order to summon our copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Now, once Red Eyes Dark Dragoon hits the board, this is essentially the end board piece. And on top of this, we can utilize Secret Village of the Spellcasters by activating it, locking our opponent out of the game completely, while we have Red Eyes Dark Dragoon and a Sylvia negate. The question that a lot of people are begging to be answered is what happens when Gaze of Timaeus banishes Red Eyes Dark Dragoon in the end phase. Well, to that I say we have Diabellstar in our hand still for follow-up. Alternatively, Red Eyes Dark Dragoon can send Diabellstar to the graveyard, summoning itself back to the field, which is another spellcaster to continue the floodgate being on board. However, there is an alternative. If, for example, one of these 4 cards is essentially any copy of Illusion of Chaos, Magician Ash Blossom, Mulchummies, Droll Lockbirds, or alternative copies of Magician's Souls and or Magician's Rod, essentially Ancient Fairy Dragon allows us to, Illusion of Chaos would essentially search Magician's Rod or Magician's Souls. It doesn't matter in this position. However, Ancient Fairy Dragon has this incredible effect that allows us to essentially summon a free body to the board. So in this hypothetical, we did probably draw into a hand trap, which is a Droll and Lockbird, for example. In this position, Ancient Fairy Dragon, if we're assuming that we're in a winnable position, or if we have a duplicate, or if we drew a Molcharmy, which can't be activated on our turn anyways, Ancient Fairy Dragon can summon our Droll and Lockbird to the field. Here what we can do is we can go Ancient Fairy Dragon and Droll and Lockbird into a copy like IP Masquerena. Now, why is this even more effective? Is once Red Eyes Dark Dragoon once we pass turn to our opponent, Red Eyes Dark Dragoon can utilize its negate, for example, as well as Sylvia. However, once Red Eyes Dark Dragoon has utilized its negate, IP Masquerena can send itself and Red Eyes Dark Dragoon in order to summon a card like Selene. And Selene's beautiful effect is because we have so many spell cards in the graveyard and on field, is Selene can revive Dragoon for a second negate. So essentially off Diabellstar or any combination of those 8 cards, we end on Sylvia, Red Eyes Dark Dragoon with 2 negates, and our opponent is locked under Secret Village while still having 4 cards in hand. Now, obviously this idea isn't set in stone. Secret Village is a very interesting card and potentially a very problematic card, especially in context when you layer it on top of Sylvia and 2 Red Eyes Dark Dragoon negates, which is really important. However, the thing I want to encourage is that one thing that I take a lot of pride in with this particular line specifically is that this doesn't feel like a gimmick. In a lot of different lists, activating or getting to Ancient Fairy Dragon to send your whatever makeshift field spell to the graveyard in order to utilize and build a line just for Secret Village feels very suboptimal. In this example specifically, I feel like we found in archetype ways and in engine ways to allow us to push for Secret Village of the Spellcasters in a way where if we get interrupted down that line, we can pivot drastically and still end on a really strong end board. An example I found is if we get interrupted on the Chorizo line, we still get access to Gaze of Timaeus, and we still get access to a Sylvia Negate, which is really effective with multiple cards in hand. Additionally, if we do draw into the Secret Village, we can pivot from that line completely and explore other avenues, whether that's other synchro plays, which probably I wouldn't experiment with too much considering the extra deck is relatively tight. However, with one Secret Village of the Spellcaster, it begs the question that if we do open Secret Village of the Spellcasters, we have a plethora of other lines to really experiment with, and this opens up the deck to really be very skill expressive for the modern format and the future formats to come. I wish I could sit here and say I did this, I thought of this line myself, but it wasn't without a collective effort. The likes of Dark Magician Tactics, Francis especially, Gohan Blanco, and Aquacust from the Dark Magician Discord, our late night theory sessions, really got the gears moving, and we really pushed and created something really special, I think, with this future support of Dark Magician. And the one optimistic side of me thinks is that if this is what we have already with an additional 6 months to prep for, we are in really, really good hands with some of the people in this community. So I encourage everyone to keep grinding and keep innovating the lists and finding new amazing ways to play Dark Magician. If you are a returning viewer, I do want to apologize for all the content revolving the new support. I promise you I am still playing the current TCG, and I do have content planned for it. That is coming in the near future. It's not only going to be future support until the new support comes out. Until then, I did take a pretty drastic step in trying to improve my content and really pushing a new direction for my videos to take. Along with new thumbnails, and essentially I want to create a new identity for the channel. If this is something that you like and you're interested in, let me know, and if it's something that you don't particularly like, also let me know. I am trying to grow this channel for the best, and essentially I can't do it alone. I need you. At the end of the day, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair right now recording this video. So until then, I wish you guys an amazing day.